Good evening, aviators. Today we are continuing the absolute beginner's guide for the F-15C Eagle. This guide is meant for anyone who is new to DCS or is returning back to the DCS guides after a hiatus. For those DCS veterans out there, your contributions are always appreciated in the comments below. Today we're going to learn and discuss how to land the F-15C Eagle from a traffic pattern or an overhead brake. Before we actually do it, we need to discuss what a traffic pattern is and what we need to do in them. So first I'm going to be looking here in Chapter 7 of the Airplane Flying Handbook for traffic patterns at airports. Standard traffic pattern is left-patterned, but some airports do have runways designated for right traffic. So this is what's known as the entry. This is called the 45 downwind entry, the 45, the downwind entry. This aircraft is already shown established in closed traffic, but if you were to enter the pattern, you'd want to enter on a 45 degree on the downwind leg. So let's discuss what the legs are. As you're approaching an airport, the downwind leg is parallel to the runway opposite the landing direction. There's the base leg, which is 90 degrees to the landing runway. And then final is on straight approach to the runway itself. So if in your left traffic pattern, you say left downwind, left base, and just final, because there's only one final, irregardless of which pattern you're doing. So you enter on a 45 degree angle, so 90 degrees would be coming like this, 0 degrees would be coming like this, so 45, halfway between 90 and 0 degrees, at traffic pattern altitude, which for a turbojet aircraft is 1,500 feet for the civilian world, and when we get to the Air Force, overhead brake will do 1,000 feet, but for the civilian world it's 1,500 feet. So you enter at 1,500 feet, and I recommend 250 knots as you enter the downwind and turn downwind. Once you get what's called midfield, which is halfway down the runway, this is where you really start your approach to land. You're going to go power idle, flaps down, gear down. That'll start slowing the aircraft, and then just maintain 1,500 feet. And we will continue the downwind till it's time to turn base, and really in the F-15 it's just a continuous turn to final. But when do we start that? Another 45 degree angle. So if we were directly what we call a beam, the numbers, that's 0 degrees. And if we were on final, that'd be 90 degrees. So staying this course, going out until an imaginary 45 degree angle points out. And once we intercept that, we'll start turning base, and final is just one continuous turn in the F-15. During the base and turn to final, it'll be 200 knots to 180 knots depending on weight. If you're heavier, you want to go 200 knots. If you're lighter, you want to go 180 knots. And maintain an angle of attack of about 20 angle of attack units, and it will be displayed on the HUD. When you roll out on final, you want to approach at an AOA of 22 to 20, and then a sink rate no higher than 1,000, preferably. Then when you're over the runway, over the threshold, you're about to touch down in a second or two, maybe you're 30, 50 feet above the runway, we go into what's called the flare, and we bring the nose up slightly and bring the power back, or leave the power steady depending on your weight, and then we touch down. When we touch down, we're going to make sure the power's all the way back, speed brakes come out, flaps go up, and then we brake, and then as we decelerate through 100 knots, we pull back on the stick to get some aerodynamic braking. And then we slow to a taxi speed, then we taxi off. Now there are some aids that can help us with distance, because we don't want to be too close to the runway when we fly downwind. So we will select the localizer if the airport has one, and we'll start turning downwind when it says about 2.5, and that'll get us just inside 2 miles approximately to 1.5 miles away from the runway on the downwind leg. To help line up on downwind, we also have the HSI, and if you have the localizer selected, you'll be able to see when you are parallel that track. Okay, so back into DCS, I'm on active pause. We're going to select that localizer, and it automatically selected closest, which is 7 miles, and I can see the airport right there, so that's good. Now we want to enter 1,500 feet above field elevation. Now, if you want to get the field elevation, you click on the airport and go to elevation 43 feet. So we want to fly this traffic pattern approximately 1,540 feet right there. So we're almost there. Then our HSI is set up for the tracking. Once I take active pause, the localizer will come alive. But we can see that it's selected for a heading of approximately 095. And if we get told runway 9, that works great. So let's contact the airport before we get off active pause. So open your communications by going / F5 for ATC. We're going to Koki. Oops, I clicked the wrong one. I apologize. Request inbound.
Pontiac 1-1, inbound. Pontiac 1-1, Koki, fly heading 252, Fort 14, QFE 29.88, runway 09, to pattern altitude.
Okay, we're going to ignore almost all of this but the assigned runway. So runway 9, coming to the map, the Koki, it is orientated based on magnetic headings. So 090 will be pointed almost due east, magnetic. So there's runway 9. And we want to come in for a left downwind on a 45. So here's the downwind to 9, here's base, here's final. We want to enter on a 45-degree angle. So we need to come from this direction. And look at that, we're set up nicely. So we're going to continue this until we see about 2.5 on our DME, distance measuring equipment. Then we're going to turn downwind and then go through the landing sequence. Okay, so off active pause now, and I put in 10 knots of wind almost right down the runway to make it realistic. So I see the airport, and there's... Okay, so it says contact tower here.
Koki, Pontiac 1-1, request landing.
They're probably not going to say anything, but there's the runway right there. We look to be going on a pretty good. I'm gonna correct just slightly. Now this is not the angle I'm going to intercept downwind on. I'm just giving us a little extra room. There we go. That's a good 45 degrees based on our flight path vector, because that's where we're actually traveling. There's 1,500 feet, looks good. And 2.5 turning downwind. Using our HSI to line up parallel. And there we go, we're approximately parallel. We're midfield, we're halfway down the runway, so power idle. Gear down. And then flaps down. So gears down, 3 green. Once we're slower than... There we go. Now we can go flaps down. Flaps are... Come on. Come down. I don't know why flaps are not coming down. There we go. Flaps are in transit. We're past 45 right there. So we're going to fly approximately 180 knots in a gradual descent, angle of attack of about 20. Flaps are down and indicated. There's the runway. Going to increase our bank slightly and pull back so we don't overshoot final. There's 22 AOA, that's okay. And we're going to roll out pretty nicely. Okay, put the flight path vector on the runway. I also have the ILS up so we can see. There's the outer marker. I'm not focused on the ILS flying, I'm just flying visually. Now my speed has gone way up and my angle of attack's gone down, so I'm decreasing power. I'm going to trim. There's 18 angle of attack. I need to be 22, so there's 19. There's 21. I'm going to increase power to slow my rate of descent. You control your rate of descent with throttle and your angle of attack with pitch and trim. So I'm trimmed for 20. There's about 170 knots. That looks good. And my flight path vector is right on the 1,000-foot markers, or the aiming point, which is what I want. I'm not aiming for the ILS. So there's 20. Pitch up slightly. And we're going to come into the flare here shortly. Okay, so start pitching up. holding power, touchdown, power back, bring your nose down, speed brakes out, and then ease on the brakes. Coming through 100 knots, pull back on the stick. Oop. And then brake as needed. Dang, my rudder pedal's being really sensitive today. Stand on the brakes. Okay, we're at a safe taxi speed, so I'm going to bring my flaps up, retract the speed brakes, and taxi off. Let's see that one more time. Looking for 2.5 DME. There we go. Bring it downwind using our HSI to help parallel while maintaining altitude. There we go. Parallel the runway. That's a good distance right there. Approximately 1.5 DME. Midfield downwind. Gear down. Flaps down. And maybe a touch of speed brakes. Request the landing.
Request landing.
Okay, flaps are coming down. Speed brakes are coming back in. So there's about 25 or 30 degrees or so. Trim nicely for 20 knots at this point. And here we go. There's 45 degrees. Starting the left turn, maintaining an AOA of 18 to 20, 200 to 180 knots. And a nice, easy descent. Nothing crazy. There's final. Maintaining 180 knots. Looking good. Might overshoot just a hair. Don't pull back because you'll get into an accelerated stall. Or a cross-controlled stall. Okay. Rolling on final. I need to bring that excess power out. Trim for... Pitch and trim for 22 AOA. And the rate of descents with throttle. So there's 21. That looks good. I'm correcting back onto the localizer. And I don't know why it's off so far on my HSI. But my ADI and my HUD show correctly. So there's 170 knots. That looks good. Bring it back just a hair to increase the rate of descent. Give a little bit more pitch up trim. There we go. Flight path vector right on the aiming point. 170 knots for this weight is good. Decreasing power. Great, bringing the power back up. Just a hair. Okay, 50 feet, coming into the flare, hold power, now take it out. Floating just a little bit. Touchdown, speed brakes come out, nose comes down. On the brakes. Coming through 100 knots, pull back on the stick. And then just control with differential braking. Okay, if there's taxi speed 50 knots. Speed brakes come in, flaps come up, and we are ready to take this taxiway. Much better landing that time. Now let's discuss an overhead brake. Okay, so same starting point as before. Now we are going to take a look at the overhead brake. So, seems like a bunch of arbitrary information, but let's break it down and then we'll talk about how we're going to fly it. So that initial heading they give you is to intercept this initial point, which is approximately 3 to 5 nautical miles out on final. So here's example of the aircraft on final. Here's the downwind. Here's the base turn. We're going to start here on the initial point. So we don't fly any downwinds initially or bases. We go right to a point on final, 3 to 5 miles out, kind of our discretion. So we're going to tune to that localizer to help us out. It gives us some distance information. Once we're on our initial point, we need to be at 1,000 feet above field elevation, so not 1,500 like previously before, but 1,000. We're going to fly this, and we're going to fly it at approximately 300 knots. We want to be 300 knots right as we're coming over the runway. As we're coming down the runway, we are going to verify that no one is on final, and we're going to brake. So at the end, the the departure end of the runway, we're going to go into a 180-degree turn. Now, how hard do we pull on this turn? Well, it's approximately 1% of our airspeed equivalent to G. Here's the layman's terms. If you're flying 300 knots, you're going to pull 3 Gs in this turn. If you're doing 350 knots, you're going to pull 3.5. And that should give you the approximate distance that you need to be away from the runway. And by the time you're done with this 180-degree turn on downwind, you should be at the approach speed to start slowing up. Now, one other thing about this brake point, before you go into the brake, you want to be throttle idle. That way you could actually slow down in this turn. When you're mid, and then once you're downwind, start throwing out the gear below 250 knots, flaps down, speed brake if necessary, and then once approximately 35 degrees, you're going to start this rollout. And it's going to be a little bit more descent, but it won't be quite such a long final this time. So it'll be a pretty good 180-degree turn while descending down to the runway. We'll roll final, get stabilized, and then go into the same flare that we did previously. Okay, so I'm going to come off of pause. I'm going to contact ATC and request inbound.
Pontiac 1-1, inbound. Pontiac 1-1, Cokie, fly heading 254, Fort 14, QFE 29.88, runway 09, to pattern altitude.
So same runway, 254. That's how far they want us to go out, and we might go all the way. We won't contact them quite yet, but we need to tune in the localizer. So click nav, because we were on the nav page, so it goes to the ILS navigation mode, and it selected the closest, which is 3.5 miles away, which I agree that's what it is. So we'll fly 3.54, and we will go out until about 7 DME, then turn inbound, intercept a 5-mile final, give us time to talk. And we can still use the HSI and ADI to help center ourselves. I'm going to start paralleling so I don't blow through the localizer at this point. 400 knots just to get us out there. And I need to be at 1,000 feet eventually, so I'll start a nice gradual descent. Because the field elevation is 54 above sea level, I need to fly 1540, so approximately there. Now if this scale switches to 1600, they'll just be aware of that. Okay, there's 5. There's 6. About ready to start my turn inbound. Coming up on 7. 7 right there. Starting my turn, and I'm decreasing the rest of my altitude that I do not need. Use my HSI to line up on the localizer. Blew through it partially, but that's why I went out a little bit to help correct. There's 1,000 feet. Okay. Correct back to the runway. Intercepting final 5 miles out. Looks pretty good. I'm going to slow to 350 knots. And we'll request the landing from this point.
Pontiac 1-1, request landing. Pontiac 1-1, Cokie, clear to land, runway 09, wind 092 at 6 meters per second.
Excellent. Looking real good. We'll maintain 1,000 feet. We're coming up on the runway, right on the localizer, or slightly to the right. So a little bit of left aileron and a little bit of right aileron. I'll do this brake at 300 knots just to make it a little bit easier, so I'll slow down. So by the time I'm over the departure end of the runway, I'm at an appropriate speed. A little bit low, so I'm correcting up. Now you just have to kind of eyeball it. So there's the departure end of the runway, disappeared below the nose. I'm at 300 knots. Looks good. Not sure why it told me that, but approximately there. Yep, there's a good eyeball. Maintain 1,000 feet. Maintain 3 Gs. Based on what I'm seeing, I need to maintain 2. Increasing a little bit of power. And now I'm on downwind. And I'm at a good speed to bring the gear out. So gear down, flaps down. And I need to reselect the nav. There we go. It sequenced it to the next ILS, so that's why I did that. So got a little low. I'm at 900 feet now. Coming back up to 1,000. There's a beam, the threshold. It's about 15 degrees. There's about 30. Nice continuous turn to final. 20 AOA. And decreasing altitude. So I'm descending about 1,000 feet a minute, which is right about where we want to be. Rolling final, which is closer than it was last time.
Pontiac 1-1. Copy. Check landing gear. Wind 092 at 6 meters per second.
Yep, gears down.
09.
So I need to slow down, so I brought my throttle back. I need to bring my AOA up, so I'm going to pitch up, trim up to get to 20. There's the middle marker, excuse me. There's 170 knots. Increasing speed. AOA's 21, looks good. Right for that aiming point. That's where I'm putting my flight vector. Okay, coming through 60 feet. Powered idle, flaring up. Touchdown. A little bit of a bounce, not bad. Bringing the nose down. Speed brakes out. And getting on the wheel brakes. Knots, pulling back on the stick, bleeding off some more airspeed, using differential braking and rudder to control myself through 50. Speed brakes in, flaps up, and I need to stop being so aggressive on the rudder pedal. It is being really sensitive today. I need to check my axis too, and maybe it reset. And that's how we land the F-15C in DCS World. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate a thumbs up. If you want to see future videos like this and other videos relating to DCS, go ahead and subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, criticism, go ahead and leave it down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.